Have you ever wished you could take back something you said in the heat of the moment? Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the constant noise, outside and inside your mind? What if silence wasn't a void, but a hidden strength waiting to be rediscovered? In the modern world, silence often fades into the background, overshadowed by the noise of our thoughts, our conversations, and the never-ending flood of notifications. From the moment we wake up, we're surrounded by sound, talking, texting, posting, scrolling. We fill every quiet space with more activity, more words, more noise. But within the teachings of Buddhism lies a timeless reminder. Silence is not emptiness, it is presence. And more than that, in certain key moments of our lives, silence becomes a sacred tool, one that can heal, guide, and transform. This is not about being passive, cold, or disconnected. On the contrary, it's about becoming more aware, more intentional, and more at peace with ourselves and others. Buddhism teaches us that silence can be more powerful than speech, especially in 5 deeply meaningful situations. And when we learn to be silent in those moments, something shifts. We begin to respond instead of react. We begin to listen, not just to others, but to the quiet wisdom within. Let us begin this journey into the heart of silence, a journey into ancient insight that feels more relevant now than ever. The power of silence. Silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's a presence that speaks louder than words ever could. It is a mindful pause between thought and action, a space where wisdom grows and truth becomes clearer. As Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, silence is essential. We need silence just as much as we need air, just as much as plants need light. But how often do we truly give ourselves that silence? Our minds are crowded, so full of chatter, plans, worries, reactions, that there's hardly any room left for clarity. We respond on impulse. We speak without pausing. We act without reflection. And in doing so, we lose touch with our own peace. Buddhism encourages us to cultivate silence, not only as a refuge, but as a skill, a way to center ourselves, a way to connect more deeply with reality. Silence becomes a gateway to mindfulness, to compassion, to self-awareness. It allows us to observe instead of judge, to feel instead of flee, and to understand rather than immediately try to explain. Most importantly, silence allows us to listen, not only to the voices of others, but to the gentle, often overlooked whisper of our own heart. Silence in the face of anger, holding back to heal. As we saw in the previous part, silence in moments of anger is not about weakness or avoidance. It's about conscious restraint. Now let's dive deeper into this truth and explore why silence matters so much when emotions are running high. When anger arises, it rarely comes alone. It often brings with it a storm of harsh words, impulsive actions, and deep regret. In such moments, silence becomes a powerful shield. It doesn't just hold back the noise, it protects us from causing harm to others and to ourselves. Like a barrier between fire and fuel, silence stops destructive energy from spreading. It gives us the space to cool down, reflect, and prevent our relationships from becoming casualties of our unfiltered emotions. There's a well-known teaching in Buddhism known as the parable of the 2 arrows. The first arrow is the initial pain or discomfort we experience. Something said, something done, something lost. That pain is real and often unavoidable. But the second arrow, that's the one we shoot at ourselves through our reactions: anger, blame, retaliation. While the first arrow wounds us, the second arrow deepens the pain unnecessarily. And that second arrow is always a choice. By remaining silent when we are angry, we refuse to fire that second arrow. We refuse to escalate suffering for ourselves and for others. But why is anger so powerful in the first place? In Buddhist philosophy, anger is not an isolated feeling. It often stems from attachment and aversion. When we desperately want things to go a certain way, or when we strongly reject something that challenges our comfort or expectations. These strong desires and rejections blur our perception. They blind us to the reality that everything is impermanent, that life flows with change, and that we are interconnected with everyone and everything. Anger, then, is often our ego's defense against loss or disappointment. In that moment, our emotions cloud our vision. We may speak without thinking, act without understanding, and later sit with the consequences. Silence becomes a sanctuary. By choosing silence, we give ourselves a pause, a sacred pause. In that space, we can breathe, observe, and feel without immediately reacting. We can notice the heat rising, but instead of letting it boil over, we gently contain it. This is not suppression, it's mindfulness, it's presence, it's wisdom in action. Silence is not emptiness, it is a container for clarity. And within that clarity, we begin to ask, what am I really angry about? Is this anger coming from hurt, fear, or unmet expectations? Am I attached to being right? Am I resisting what I cannot control? These questions invite deep self-reflection. They help us see the root of our suffering, not outside of us, but within. Sometimes we realize our expectations were rigid. Sometimes our aversion came from misunderstanding. And sometimes the anger was simply masking grief or fear. Moreover, silence preserves what matters. In relationships, a moment of anger can tear down what took years to build. Words said in rage can echo long after the moment passes. But silence offers space for healing, for rethinking, for empathy. It helps us protect the trust and connection we value. In Buddhist practice, this kind of silence is a form of right speech, one of the noble elements of the Eightfold Path. By not saying what should not be said, we honor our values and deepen our awareness. The two arrows, choosing silence over suffering. In the previous section, we explored how silence in moments of anger can prevent damage and offer emotional clarity. Now, let's deepen our understanding through a powerful teaching from Buddhist tradition, the parable of the two arrows. This ancient story explains a simple but life-changing truth. When something painful happens to us, an insult, a disappointment, or a loss, that's the first arrow. It hits us hard and we feel it immediately. This pain is part of being alive. No one escapes it. It might be emotional or physical, but it's real and unavoidable. However, the second arrow is different. It represents the pain we create ourselves through our reactions. When we respond with anger, bitterness, or resentment, we're not healing the wound. We're stabbing ourselves again and again and again. The second arrow multiplies suffering unnecessarily. But here's the wisdom. We can't always stop the first arrow, but we can absolutely stop the second one. And this is where the power of silence comes in. By choosing silence in the heat of anger, we pause the chain reaction. We feel the pain of the first arrow, yes, but we don't escalate it. We don't throw words like daggers. We don't slam doors, shout accusations, or harden our hearts. Instead, we breathe. We observe. We allow space for the emotion to rise and fall without feeding it with more drama. This practice doesn't mean we pretend everything's fine. It means we give ourselves a moment of mindful space, a moment where wisdom can enter. In that space, we shift from reactivity to reflection. We begin to understand, yes, I am hurt. Yes, I feel anger. But what am I going to do with it? Silence becomes a doorway to insight. We can ask ourselves, what am I attached to in this situation? What expectation just got challenged? Is this worth the emotional cost of lashing out? These quiet inner questions lead us toward transformation. Instead of being consumed by the fire of anger, we learn to stand beside it and watch it burn out naturally. In doing so, we reduce our suffering and avoid harming those we care about. And silence doesn't just help us with ourselves, it helps us connect with others more deeply. When we're angry, our attention narrows. We become fixated on our pain. We stop listening. We stop caring. But through silence, we widen our awareness. We begin to see that the other person may be hurting too. We hear not just their words, but what might lie beneath them. We replace accusation with understanding. Even more importantly, silence breaks the destructive cycle of reaction. Anger often invites more anger. One shout leads to another. One wound becomes two. One fight becomes a pattern. But silence interrupts that loop. It puts a full stop where the story could have spiraled further. Over time, this practice builds something essential: emotional resilience. We become less reactive, less explosive. We let go of old grudges more easily. We find it easier to forgive, not because we're weak, but because we're free. And this is one of the deepest goals in Buddhism: to be liberated from the suffering caused by anger. Silence in the face of gossip and slander. Choosing integrity over impulse. After seeing how silence can disarm anger and break cycles of emotional harm, we now move to another subtle yet powerful form of suffering: gossip and slander. Unlike anger, which is loud and obvious, gossip often hides behind smiles, whispers, or even well-meaning concern. But its impact can be just as damaging. In Buddhist teachings, right speech is one of the core elements of the Eightfold Path. It asks us to speak with truth, kindness, and purpose. Gossip and slander stand in direct violation of these principles. They may seem harmless in the moment, but they create ripples of division, mistrust, and suffering that extend far beyond a single conversation. Why do people gossip? Often, it stems from emotions like jealousy, resentment, or the desire to elevate oneself by pulling others down. Sometimes it arises from boredom or the mistaken belief that we're connecting with others by talking about someone instead of to them. But regardless of the reason, gossip and slander never align with compassion or wisdom. By choosing silence in these moments, we make a conscious decision not to participate in harmful speech. We step out of the cycle before it gains momentum. Our silence becomes a quiet act of resistance, a refusal to spread negativity. And the benefits of this silence are many. First, we protect ourselves from the karmic consequences of untruthful or harmful words. In Buddhism, every action, especially speech, has consequences. When we speak out of malice or carelessness, that energy doesn't disappear. It returns, often in forms we don't expect. Second, silence invites self-reflection. What drives us to listen or contribute to gossip? Are we envious? Insecure? Do we fear being left out or unseen? These questions, uncomfortable as they may be, help us uncover our deeper emotional patterns, and only through awareness can transformation begin. Third, silence sends a gentle but powerful signal to others. When we refuse to laugh along, nod in agreement, or add fuel to the fire, we change the energy of the conversation. We don't have to lecture or confront. Sometimes, simply not participating is enough to make others pause and reconsider their words. Imagine gossip as a flame. When it's passed from one person to another, it grows stronger. But if one person, just one, refuses to pass it on, the fire weakens. That's the power of mindful silence. In Buddhist understanding, words are not just sounds, they're seeds. They grow into thoughts, actions, realities. Gossip and slander plant seeds of division. But silence, rooted in awareness, plants seeds of integrity, peace, and inner strength. And let's not forget, gossip doesn't only hurt the one being spoken about, it also wounds the speaker. Spreading negativity clouds the mind, feeds harmful emotions, and distances us from kindness. The more we engage in this pattern, the more we suffer, internally and in our relationships. That's why Buddhism teaches us that right speech isn't just a social courtesy, it's a path to inner liberation. So the next time we find ourselves in the presence of gossip, we can ask, does this conversation bring harm or healing? Am I planting seeds of division or choosing the stillness of compassion? And if the answer is unclear, silence may be the most honest response we have. Now, having understood how silence protects us and others from the dangers of careless speech, we turn to another moment that calls for quiet strength. When you're being criticized. Silence in the face of gossip. Creating space for awareness. Previously, we explored how silence can protect us and others from the subtle harm of gossip and slander. Now let's go deeper into the power of choosing not to speak and what that silence truly means. When we hear gossip, our instinct might be to react, chime in, add our own opinion, or simply nod along so we don't seem distant. But choosing silence in these moments is not passivity. It is an active, conscious refusal to fuel the fire. It is stepping out of a harmful cycle before the words take root and spread further harm. In Buddhism, this aligns directly with the practice of right speech, speaking only what is true, kind, and beneficial. When we remain silent in the face of gossip, we honor that path. But more than that, we protect our own emotional health, our relationships, and our karmic path. Silence becomes a moment of powerful pause. It gives us time to ask ourselves, why do I feel tempted to join in? Am I trying to feel superior? Am I reacting out of jealousy or irritation? Will this bring peace, or will it deepen separation? These questions open a door into self-awareness. Gossip may feel small on the surface, but it often reveals deeper emotional patterns, attachments to status, a fear of being excluded, or hidden insecurities. Recognizing those truths is the beginning of transformation. And beyond ourselves, our silence can quietly reshape the environment around us. When we choose not to engage, we send a subtle but unmistakable message. This isn't the kind of conversation I support. There's no need for confrontation. Often, silence speaks louder than words. Others may notice and even begin to reflect on their own behavior. It only takes one person to interrupt the flow for others to reconsider the direction. In the bigger picture, this mindful silence nurtures a different kind of culture, one built on kindness, respect, and empathy. Instead of bonding through criticism, we begin to seek connection through appreciation. We shift focus from faults to qualities, from judgment to understanding. And little by little, we help build a community that values care over cruelty. This form of silence isn't about being passive or afraid, it's about compassion in action. It gives us the strength to hold back, to look inward, and to speak only when our words can bring peace or healing. This is how silence becomes not just a personal practice, but a ripple that transforms the space around us. And now we arrive at another powerful test of our speech: conflict. Silence in the midst of conflict, the calm within the storm. Having seen how silence can protect us from the harm of gossip and unkind words, we now arrive at one of the most emotionally charged spaces of human life: conflict. Whether it's a disagreement over ideas or a personal clash of emotions, conflict is an inevitable part of our relationships. But how we engage with it can make all the difference. Arguments with a loved one, tension with a colleague, or a heated dispute with a friend. These situations test our patience and emotional awareness. And in the teachings of Buddhism, there is a surprising but powerful response that often leads to healing: silence. Conflict, by its nature, stirs our emotions. It challenges our need to be understood, to feel respected, to protect our beliefs. And that emotional charge can quickly pull us into reactive patterns, raising our voices, interrupting, defending, attacking. Yet Buddhism encourages us to respond differently, not by retreating, but by pausing. Silence in the heat of conflict is not avoidance. It is not weakness. It is wisdom in practice. It creates space, mental and emotional space, for something new to arise. Space for empathy, for reflection, for understanding. Why is this so important? Because most conflicts don't begin with violence. They begin with miscommunication, with assumptions, with two people speaking but neither truly listening. Silence becomes a bridge, allowing one person to speak while the other listens without preparing a defense. It becomes a safe space where voices can be heard without fear of immediate judgment. In this quiet, we begin to understand what's really being said, not just the words, but the feelings behind them, the frustration, the fear, the hope of being seen. And as we listen, we soften. The ego's grip loosens. Suddenly, it's not about winning, it's about healing. But silence is also for ourselves. When conflict flares up, emotions take over. We speak from a place of urgency, not clarity. Our words may reflect temporary heat rather than lasting truth. By choosing silence, even briefly, we give ourselves the chance to breathe, to check in, to ask, why am I so triggered right now? What is this really about? Is what I want to say helpful, or will it harm? These questions may seem simple, but in the moment, they can change the entire direction of the conversation. Moreover, silence helps interrupt the cycle of escalation. When anger meets anger, the fire only grows. But when anger meets calm or silence, it loses momentum. Silence can become the cushion that absorbs the initial blow and prevents further damage. There's also humility in silence. We let go of the urgent need to be right. We pause our instinct to dominate or control. In doing so, we embody one of Buddhism's deepest principles: non-attachment. We stop clinging to being right, to protecting our pride, or to proving our worth. And in that surrender, there is freedom. Silence doesn't mean we don't care. It means we care enough to not make things worse. It means we care about the relationship more than the argument. It means we are willing to delay speaking in order to speak more kindly, more wisely, and more truthfully when the time is right. In this way, silence during conflict becomes not just a pause, but a practice of peace. And as we continue exploring, we'll look at one final situation where silence carries profound power, when words would hurt more than help. Silence in times of conflict, a path to understanding. We saw how silence during conflict isn't about stepping back, but about stepping deeper into understanding, empathy, and clarity. It gives us the wisdom to hear, the strength to pause, and the space to heal. But what happens when the pain isn't ours? What if the one suffering stands before us in silence, and all we can offer is our presence? This brings us to another sacred moment where silence speaks louder than words, when we witness the suffering of others. Silence in times of suffering, holding space with compassion. Buddhism teaches us that compassion is not just a feeling, but a practice. And in some of life's most tender moments, that practice begins with saying, nothing at all. When someone close to us is suffering, whether it's heartbreak, illness, loss, or overwhelming stress, our first instinct is usually to reach for words. We want to comfort, to encourage, to fix. We might offer advice, quotes, stories, or even humor. Our intentions are kind, but sometimes they unintentionally dismiss the depth of someone's pain. Buddhism gently reminds us, in the face of suffering, silence can be the most profound response. Why? Because true compassion doesn't always speak. It listens. It holds space. It allows the person in pain to simply be, without judgment, interruption, or pressure to feel better. Imagine a grieving friend sitting quietly in your presence. You don't need to say, "It's going to be okay," or "Everything happens for a reason." What they need isn't an explanation. What they need is you, your presence, your stillness, your willingness to sit with them in the discomfort without trying to rush it away. This kind of silence says, "I'm here. I see you. You don't have to go through this alone." Suffering is part of life. It comes in many forms: physical illness, emotional wounds, life transitions. Sometimes it's visible. Sometimes it hides behind a forced smile. But when we meet it with quiet compassion, we give others the freedom to feel without needing to perform strength. Silence in these moments does not mean indifference. On the contrary, it communicates a deep respect for the other person's experience. It tells them, "I trust your strength. I trust your process. I'm here not to fix you, but to walk beside you." By staying silent, we allow others to share what they're ready to share, when they're ready. We give them autonomy. We hold back from projecting our own fears, our own urgency to resolve things. And in that shared silence, healing can begin. This practice doesn't just apply to our closest relationships. Every day we witness suffering among colleagues, neighbors, strangers on the street, or even through the news. In these moments, our stillness becomes a subtle offering, a way of saying, "Your pain matters. I won't look away. I won't speak over it." The beauty of this silence is that it requires no special training, only presence. You don't need perfect words. You just need an open heart, a calm presence, and the willingness to be fully with someone, exactly where they are. As the Buddha taught, true compassion arises not from fixing pain, but from fully embracing it, with warmth, with stillness, and with silence. The quiet gift of presence, silence in moments of suffering. In the last part, we discovered how silence, when offered to someone in pain, can speak volumes. It becomes a sacred act of presence, gently saying, "You are not alone." Now, let's take a closer look at this quiet wisdom and why silence can often reach places words cannot. When we see someone suffering, especially someone we care deeply about, our instinct is to comfort, to say something kind, to reassure, to offer solutions, wisdom, or even hope. And while these efforts come from the heart, Buddhism reminds us that sometimes silence is more compassionate than speech. This perspective is deeply rooted in the Buddhist teaching of right speech, the idea that our words should be truthful, kind, timely, and helpful. But sometimes, even kind words can fall short. They might feel too shallow, too soon, or even unintentionally dismissive of the depth of the person's pain. In these moments, silence becomes not the absence of care, but the embodiment of it. By choosing to remain silent in the presence of someone suffering, we create a space that feels safe, open, and deeply respectful. We are saying without words, "I am here with you. I don't need to fix you. I'm not afraid of your pain." This silent companionship can be far more healing than hurried advice or forced positivity. It allows the other person to speak if they want to, or to sit in silence if that's what they need. They're not pressured to be strong or to move on quickly. They are given permission to feel fully and freely. And in that space of silence, something profound can happen. The person suffering may feel truly seen for the first time. They may begin to express what has been locked inside: pain, fear, confusion, grief, without fear of being judged, rushed, or misunderstood. This kind of sharing can be deeply therapeutic. It gives voice to emotions that often don't know how to speak, and space for those feelings to breathe. Silence also honors something sacred: autonomy. When we hold back from giving unsolicited advice, we show trust. We say, "I believe in your strength. I believe in your journey." We recognize that each person must navigate their own suffering in their own way, at their own pace. What works for us may not work for them. What they need now may not be answers, but simply to be allowed to feel. Sometimes, even the most well-meaning words, "You'll get through this. Everything happens for a reason. Stay strong," can feel like pressure. But silence? Silence gives room. It is spacious, gentle, and empowering. This isn't to say that words are always wrong. There are moments when a kind word, a quiet "I'm here," or a simple "that must be so hard" can be deeply comforting. But Buddhism invites us to discern, to ask ourselves, is what I'm about to say truly helpful, or am I saying it to ease my own discomfort? In this way, silence becomes a form of active compassion. We're not withdrawing, we're showing up fully, with our whole presence, undistracted and undemanding. We're practicing deep listening, even if no words are spoken. Silence, in times of suffering, reflects the core of Buddhist compassion, not to rescue or explain, but to accompany. To sit beside another human being, holding space for whatever they're going through without needing to change it. And when we do this, when we offer our quiet, non-judgmental presence, we contribute to a more connected, tender, and understanding world. Silence in our own suffering, listening to the voice within. In the previous reflection, we saw how silence can be a profound act of compassion toward others, a quiet offering of presence and support. But what about when we are the ones hurting? Can silence also become a source of healing for ourselves? Buddhism gently answers, yes, the healing silence within always. Be silent when you are suffering. This simple teaching holds deep wisdom. It doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean holding everything in. Rather, it invites us to discover the sacred stillness that exists within us. the space where true healing begins. At some point in life, we all face pain: the death of a loved one, a broken relationship, a health crisis, a silent ache we can't explain. Suffering is a thread woven into the human journey, and though it takes many forms, its presence is universal. In these moments of sorrow or confusion, our instinct might be to talk, to vent, to cry out, to reach for comfort. And often, that's exactly what we need. Buddhism does not deny the value of community or connection, but it also reminds us that not all pain can be spoken, and not all healing comes through words. Sometimes what we need most is silence. In silence, we give ourselves permission to feel without performing, to sit with our pain, not as a problem to fix, but as something to witness with compassion. This kind of silence is not empty, it's full of care. It allows us to turn inward to become our own sanctuary. When we stop trying to explain our suffering to others, or even to ourselves, we create space for something else to arise: self-compassion. We begin to treat ourselves the way we might treat a dear friend, with gentleness, with patience, with understanding. We stop judging ourselves for not being strong enough, for not healing fast enough, or for not having it all together. And in that quiet kindness, healing begins. Silence also frees us from the pressure to perform strength. In modern life, we often feel the need to hold it together, to put on a brave face, to appear in control. But inside, we may feel overwhelmed, broken, or lost. Choosing silence allows us to set down that armor, even if just for a while. It gives us the space to breathe, to simply be. And in that stillness, something deeper begins to stir. We start to reconnect with our inner wisdom, the part of us that knows suffering is impermanent, that every feeling rises and eventually fades. We remember that we are not alone in our pain, that across the world others are grieving, aching, healing, that to suffer is not a flaw, but a mark of being human. Buddhism teaches that even in suffering there is insight. In silence, we may begin to see the impermanence of all things. We may reflect on how tightly we've clung to expectations, to control, or to identities that no longer serve us. We may realize that pain, while difficult, can open the door to greater awareness, humility, and transformation. Of course, there are moments when speaking with a friend, teacher, or therapist is essential. Seeking support is not weakness, it's wisdom. Buddhism values Sangha, the spiritual community, as a vital source of compassion. But there are also sacred moments when silence becomes our greatest teacher. It helps us hear the whisper beneath the noise. It teaches us to sit with discomfort without running. It reminds us that within us is a space untouched by pain, calm, clear, and whole. So the next time you find yourself suffering, don't rush to explain it. Don't force yourself to feel better too quickly. Instead, pause, breathe, listen. There is wisdom waiting for you in the silence. The final silence. From inner stillness to outer awakening. In the previous reflection, we explored how silence, when offered to our own pain, can become a sacred refuge, a place not of suppression, but of self-compassion, a moment where we meet ourselves fully, without judgment or hurry. Now, let us draw this journey to a close by embracing the full scope of what silence can offer, not only in suffering, but in 5 of life's most defining moments. The profound wisdom of silence in 5 situations. Life, by its very nature, is full of intensity. We are constantly challenged by emotion, conflict, and the unpredictability of human relationships. Yet, within these storms, Buddhism offers a quiet and radical truth. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. When we are angry, silence protects. When others gossip, silence refrains. In the middle of conflict, silence de-escalates. When others suffer, silence embraces. And when we suffer, silence nurtures. This is not withdrawal. It is not avoidance. It is mindful presence. Silence in our own suffering offers us a sacred space to turn inward, to hold our pain gently without the need to explain it away. In this silence, we are no longer performing. We are simply being. We rest in the raw truth of the moment, and from there, healing begins. While it is true that sharing with others can be a form of release, Buddhism reminds us that some pain is too deep for words, and trying to translate it can sometimes diminish its sacred nature. In these moments, silence becomes a companion, not to hide from others, but to sit fully with ourselves. And through this quiet, we remember an essential truth. All things are impermanent. Every storm passes. Every wound, when given space and care, begins to close. In silence, we are able to observe the nature of suffering, not as something that defines us, but as something that flows through us. Like all things, it arises and it passes. This deep silence also allows us to see that our suffering is not separate from the world. It is part of it. Just like joy, grief is something all beings experience. Recognizing this shared human condition can soften our pain and connect us to a greater sense of compassion, not only for ourselves, but for all beings. Silence as a way of living. When we embrace silence in these 5 situations, anger, gossip, conflict, witnessing suffering, and personal pain, we are not retreating from life. We are stepping into it more fully, with mindfulness, empathy, and grace. We begin to speak less, but say more. We begin to react less, but understand more. We begin to judge less and love more. This path of silence is not cold or distant. It is deeply human. It is woven into the heart of the Buddhist path through right speech, non-attachment, compassion, and mindfulness. When practiced sincerely, silence becomes a transformative force, softening our inner world and nurturing peace in the outer one. We begin to see clearly. Not everything needs to be said. Not every emotion needs to be voiced. Sometimes, in the space between thoughts and words, we find our truest wisdom. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, silence is essential. We need silence just as much as we need air, just as much as plants need light. If our minds are crowded with words and thoughts, there is no space for us. And so, in the stillness of these 5 moments, we create space. Space to think clearly, space to feel fully, space to live more mindfully, more compassionately, and more authentically. This is the gift of silence, and this is the beginning of inner peace. If this teaching touched something within you, we invite you to pause, take a breath, and carry the wisdom of silence into your day. Subscribe to the channel Buddhism Seeds to receive more timeless insights that nourish the heart. If this video resonated with you, please like, share, and leave us a thoughtful comment below. We'd love to hear how silence has shaped your journey. May peace be with you, quietly, gently, and always.